Thank you very much indeed. Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Darren Sanders. I'm a Liberal Democrat councillor for Baffins, North Milton and South Copner, and I'm also the Cabinet Member for Housing and Preventing Homelessness. The meeting is being broadcasted to enable the press and public to view it. We are meeting virtually in response to the limitations placed on governance by the COVID-19 pandemic. For the purposes of this meeting, the City Solicitor has advised that pursuant to Section 78 of the Coronavirus Act 2020, this meeting will be run by reference to the model standing orders as set out in the Local Authorities open brackets coronavirus close brackets open brackets flexibility of local authority meetings close brackets regulations 2020 number 392, otherwise known as the regulations. Please can members and officers turn their microphones off when not speaking. That also includes me. So for the benefit of the mastheads who are watching, I will ask councillor and officer colleagues to introduce themselves and also to declare any interests that may have. I'll start with Scott.
Thank you, Darren, for the introduction. It's Councillor Scott Pater Harris, the Councillor for Hillsey Ward and the opposition spokesperson for the Conservative.
Thank you very much. Cal?
I'm not sure Scott was done then, was he?
I didn't know if you want to do declarations now, Darren.
I'm happy to. I don't mind.
It's just a declaration for the. Just let me have a look at my papers. For the pathway for rough sleepers and purchase of associated support and property, as obviously this is going to the planning committee shortly, and I am a member of the planning committee, but I will not be sitting on the item and therefore didn't have a vote. But I thought it was best to declare that now.
Yep, that's very good. Thank you for that, Scott. That's excellent. Cal?
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Cal Corkery, one of the councillors for Charles Dickens Ward and the Labour spokesperson for housing. I do have a personal interest in items on the agenda in that I'm a council tenant. However, my understanding of the Code of Conduct and following discussions with the City Solicitor is that that's a personal interest, but is not prejudicial and does not preclude me from discussions involving council housing matters.
That is correct. And Cal, I'm delighted after the years on the waiting list, you've managed to get a council place. This is excellent news. Excellent news. James?
Good afternoon, James Hill, Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services.
Thank you very much. Paul?
Good afternoon, Paul Fielding, Assistant Director for Housing.
Meredith?
Good afternoon, Meredith Hughes, Assistant Director, Buildings, Housing, Neighbourhood and Buildings.
Thank you. Maria?
Maria Cole, representing the consortium.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for taking the time to join us, Maria. The one I know as Democratic Services 1.
Good afternoon, Anna Martin, Local Democracy Officer.
Superb. Alison?
Good afternoon, Alison Smart, Housing Business Partner.
Thank you very much indeed. Sharon?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sharon George, working with rough sleepers in the Housing Needs Advice and Support Service.
Thank you. Joe?
Jo Bennett, Head of Business Relationships, Growth and Support.
Thank you. Wayne?
Hello, Wayne Layton, Finance Manager here at Paulson City Council.
Thank you. Patrick?
Good afternoon, Patrick Lee, Interim Head of Private Sector Housing.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Mark?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Mark Fitch, Head of Local Authority Housing for Paulson City Council.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Those are all the people present. I do have a declaration of interest as well, which is that I rent privately, so I may or may not be affected by the private rented sector strategy. However, after discussions with the City Solicitor, it is deemed that I am okay to pass it if necessary. So thank you for all that, and that's the declaration of interest done. I now want to move to the council housing budget, including rents 2021-2022. Who's going to start this then?
That'll be me. Right, okay, so first item, this council housing budget for 21-22. The report seeks to set out the forecast outturn for 2021 and also seek approval for agreeing next year's budget and note the forecast revenue position for the for the next 2 years, and then also seek approval on various rents and other charges. The recommendations are that we approve the revised budget for 2021, and then there are various charges and dwelling rents which are listed in the appendix from 2 to 7, and then we'll talk about the revenue budget for the next couple of years after that. So far, before this report was brought about, which looks at increasing some charges or amending them, we carried out an initial consultation, and that took the form of an article that was sent out in House Talk in mid-November. We then had a residents' meeting in December, and then a further one in January to listen to any feedback. I had some responses back from the consultation period, but most of those were either just broad comments or specific things about people's particular circumstances. So from the consultation that went through, there was very little change from what we proposed back in December and in our House Talk article. In the report, we reference the rent standard that allows the City Council to increase its rents in line with that, which is CPI +1, and the CPI reference point, which was in September, was 0.5%. So the council could, if it chose, increase rents to 1.5%, and this report recommends that we do precisely that, and for reasons that I'll come on to later on. It also sets out within the main body of the report the proposed increases to other charges or where we freeze charges. So the first one is about service charge. So if you live in a house, you'll pay a lower service charge, which last year was £6.30, and the proposal is that will increase by 28 pence per week. And if you live in a flat, that service charge will increase from £15.26 to £16.10 a week, which is an 84 pence increase per week for the year. We also, in the report, talk about increases to sheltered housing charges, and again, they're in the main body of the report. Those largely are going up between 2.6 and 3.91%, depending on which category of sheltered housing you live in. There's also a section that talks about laundry charges. Those are not proposed to be increased this year. We then talk about the charges for garage rents and parking. And those, if you're domiciled to that particular area, you're paying a lower charge for parking, and if you're not and you're a commuter, you'll be paying a higher charge, so that it's in line with the rest of the parking charges within the particular area. And we're proposing that these charges for garages and for parking are increased by 1.5% for this current year, or for 2021. And then there's a section in here about utility charges, and the council are not proposing to increase those for the second year running. Apologies, I'm reading off two separate documents here. So once we get past the section about charges, we talk about the budget for next year and the forecast outturn for this year. So currently the council are forecasting at the end of this financial year that we will have an in-year deficit of around about £235,000, which is an improvement, if you like, on the expected deficit that we were forecasting when we had this meeting this time last year. And partly that's down, well, largely that's down to the fact that because of COVID-19, we have spent less on our repairs and maintenance where we haven't been able to access people's properties. Now, whilst that's a good thing in this current year, it just means potentially that we're kicking the can down the road for next year, then potentially there could be a knock-on effect. As far as next year is concerned, we are predicting that we will have an in-year deficit of 1.2 million. And that deficit will be met from the HRA ring-fence reserve. But in the years following that, we'll see that we'll have a deficit of around about 1.3 million in 2022-23 and 23-24, and going forward. So eventually what you'd end up with is a fully depleted reserve. But by the time we get to 2024, as it says in this report, we expect a closing reserve balance of just under £16 million. So in the short term, we haven't got a issue because the reserve will cover those in-year deficits. But if that were to continue, it has a detrimental effect, and we wouldn't be able to meet all of our obligations over a 30-year period once this has actually been diminished. So the council are working to find out ways that we can reduce that deficit. What's driving that deficit is really around the age and archetype of our stock and the fact that we've got an increasing depreciation charge. And that depreciation charge, although it hits the revenue account and reduces the reserve, is then remitted into a NAVA reserve called the Major Repairs Reserve, which allows us to do planned maintenance to maintain our properties. And of course, as properties get older, the amount of depreciation we have to put in that reserve is less. So building more property is a positive impact when it's newer, and the depreciation charge isn't so high and the obligation on the council. And that is the report highlights. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you for that, Wayne. Just for people who are watching, normally these decisions are taken by one person, who in this case happens to be me, without any input from opposition spokespeople or indeed local residents, but we do it slightly differently in this council. So we do involve local residents, and we also involve opposition spokespeople in the discussion of what is going ahead, although ultimately it is my decision as the cabinet member. So what I'm going to do is I will, throughout the meeting, I will go to each relevant stakeholder in turn before trying to sum up and put forward some thoughts. So I shall start with Maria from the Residents Consortium. Maria.
Thank you. Just one question, and Wayne will be pleased it's only one question. Bad debt provision, has that been altered considerably by the COVID because of people being furloughed and out of work?
Yes, yeah, it has had an input. Not as bad as we first thought when we were in the first phase of the pandemic, partly because we saw a lot of kind of delinquent debt around that early part of the year due to the fact that people were trying to access universal credit. But we think this year our bad debt has probably increased by about 600,000.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Maria. If people watching are seeing I'm looking away from the screen, it's because I have the agenda on my left-hand side. I was going to do Cal first, but Scott raised his hand first, so therefore Scott goes first.
Thank you, Darren. Sorry if I've thrown you off your stride.
It's completely normal, Scott, so that's absolutely fine.
Thank you. At least I'm consistent. No, it's a good point. I think actually I'm going to lead on from where Maria left off on bad debts. I think that's a really really good point actually. And Wayne says it's increased by around 600,000. So what is our level of bad debt at the moment, Wayne?
Today,
as we sit
I
here
think
today,
we've got it's set aside around about 2.2 million.
So we've got about 2.2 million of bad debt at the moment.
That's what we put in our provision.
Okay.
What the bad debt is today, the actual bad debt, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but the provision is there in order to cover it.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know the exact number.
It's quite a stark number though, isn't it? That in normal times we wouldn't be sitting on 2.2 million.
That'd be about 1.5.
Yeah. Okay, that's brilliant. So okay, fine. Thank you for that. You said about we spent less on repairs and maintenance, so it's almost we've kicked the can down the road. I actually wrote that term down. How have we factored in that work as we move forward? Because as the world is changing and material costs are increasing, container and shipping costs are increasing, have we factored that inevitable price increase on materials for repairs with our contractors, or have we just put the baseline figure of what it would normally be?
Yeah, so repairs, there's two major lines within the HRA account. One is repairs and maintenance, which is those reactive ones, which is the figure that's around about 24.5 million each year. And then the other figure is the depreciation charge. Now that depreciation charge is what we can do on planned maintenance, so big capital works. So when I say we've kicked the can down the road, we have traditionally underspent against the 24.5 million because we're effectively dealing with what's coming through the door. But we provide for about £1,700 a year per property, and that's where the £24 million comes from. But some of that charge is also met from our depreciation, our planned maintenance. So we would expect to meet some of those costs from there. So we're confident that 24.5 million is enough to meet our pressures going forward, but it could be plus or minus that figure depending on what is presented to us. But history tells us it's about that figure. Okay. Anything else will be met from that depreciation, that MRA charge.
So you're not concerned about rising price increases in the market and availability. So obviously there'll be certain of our residents that will need repairs done where they can't actually physically get the product for a certain amount of time, and when they have got it, it's gone up 10%. Have we factored that sort of have we factored any of that into our costing process?
We do consider it, but we haven't. It's not reflected in a repairs and maintenance budget.
Okay. I think with the way the world is and with the way that things are going, I think it probably should be for future reference, especially with the fluctuation in the marketplace at the moment. I think we would be fools not to do that. I'm just going to go on to the deficit that we have in the HRA, which is considerable and ongoing. And I know that we're really talking about rent setting here, but it is the most probably, I think if we look at 6.1 of the report, it's probably the most stark thing in there at the moment. And the rent setting is important, but obviously this is equally as important because if we carry on this trajectory, the reserves are going to get pillaged within a good 5 to 6 year period, and we're going to be into some serious issues. So I'd just be keen to know that what sort of work is being done to deal with that deficit at the moment.
I think, James, are you going to field that question?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I think this year we've seen a significant impact on the plans we had, particularly around our efficiency programme. But I would position that those are delayed, not, and we've still got a desire to run the efficiency programme. Hopefully, if we come through COVID in this year. So just to put that in practical terms, we did a lot of work with Mountjoy pre-COVID. Unfortunately, the implementation of some of the changes has been impacted by COVID. We've got some efficiency work that ComServe, Liberty and other contractors wish to go for. And when I say efficiency, it's part of the drive to reduce costs, but it doesn't impact on service delivery. I think the other thing we've seen this year is that there is going to be a gain in terms of the overall number of units coming to the HRA. So members on this call will know that we've been very active in buying properties into the HRA, and we're anticipating at the end of the year that we will have purchased more than we've actually sold, which has a positive benefit on the rental income line. So it's not a fully formed plan at this stage. I think what the report is doing is giving you a clear signal that we need to address that deficit. And hopefully, as we pull clear of the pandemic, we'll have the capacity to do so and form the plan early part of this year, and then present that to the administration towards the end of this financial year.
So just on that point, Jane, I think it's a really good point. With the fact that we haven't done as much planned maintenance and planned repair work, and the deficit is where it is now, where would it be if we'd have done all that work?
We would have had an outturn which was what we originally said would be around about 1.2 million.
So it'd be 1.2 million deficit.
It'll be £1 million more than what we're reporting in 6.1.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you. That's all for me.
Did you have any other questions?
Not for now, Darren.
Right. This means that you'll come back later. Okay, fine. Cal?
Thank you, Darren. I don't have any outstanding questions that haven't already been answered in lead up to this meeting. I do have a few comments up to you about whether you want me to chip them in now or...
I'm more than happy to. I mean, if Scott is asking the questions, you're doing the comments, that's fine.
Okay. So in terms of the overall budget, I think it's just worth kind of reflecting on what this is going to mean to kind of tenants at the front line in our communities. The impression that I've picked up kind of during my time on the council, and of course including as a tenant as well, is that housing services are generally well run by kind of dedicated officers and operatives that are really deeply rooted in their communities. Of course, it helps having the local housing officers. That means people are kind of physically in those communities, working right next to often people that they're having to help out with their housing issues. I think the housing budget helps us to continue that going forward, ensures that funding is there for essential repairs and other services that tenants rely on. One of the things that I have picked up, as I say, during my time on the council in terms of comparing how Portsmouth City Council runs its housing services to other providers, something that we don't do that maybe I'd just like to put forward today as an idea that you may wish to consider as part of your budget, Darren, is the idea of having a dedicated hardship fund for Portsmouth City Council tenants. Now, this is something that is commonplace in other social housing providers, where they'll have a set ring-fenced amounts set aside, taken out of people's rents and leasehold and charges, service charges, and then that's available for people when they really need it. So when they encounter kind of financial hardship, and clearly we're going to have lots of tenants encountering financial hardship in the year to come with the impact of the pandemic continuing to fall. And just to give some ideas of the way in which I know that other social landlords manage this budget for their tenants, kind of Vivid, the largest housing association with properties in Portsmouth, I know they have a welfare fund that's then available for tenants to access. Quite often calls on it are with regards to, for example, white goods or flooring, which are two kind of obviously quite costly pieces of essential household items that people often don't have. And I've probably lost count of the amount of times I've gone into social housing tenants' properties, including council tenants' properties, and they haven't got flooring because they moved in and there wasn't any flooring and they've never been able to provide it, or they haven't got their white goods that they need because they moved in and there wasn't any there, or what was there has now broken down. So I think I'd just like to take this opportunity, Darren, to, like I say, put forward that idea. And maybe you could consider making a one-off allocation from the budget towards a hardship fund. It could be a relatively small figure in relation to the overall budget and the level of reserves that have. I mean, a figure that I'd put forward to consider maybe as a one-off would be £100,000. That as a one-off fee that's then kind of managed throughout the year, and then we come back next year and review how it's been spent, whether it's been worthwhile, and whether allocations within the budget can be made going forward to continue that. So as I say, I think overall the council has run its housing services well, and that tenants are getting a good service, and this budget is going to support them to continue that happening. But I would like to put forward that idea. I know I don't have the formal right to do so, but there's no reason, I guess, why you can't listen to my proposal, Darren, and reflect on it, that we consider a kind of ring-fenced Portsmouth City Council hardship fund for our tenants to support people going forwards out the back of the pandemic. Thank you.
You're on mute, Councillor Sanders.
Thank you for that. Before I come back on that, James, did you have anything that you wanted to add on that at all?
In terms of Councillor Corker's idea about hardship fund, yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting idea. It's one that we would just wish to have a look at the services we are providing. Councillor Corker, you made a comparison to RSLs. As you know, we fund through the HRA money advisors. We've got the Tackling Poverty Coordinator post, all of which are designed to support residents in with financial problems, money management and so on. And we've got funding in place through Space for the Moving On project, which provides support for people moving into property. So I just wonder if actually we're doing it in different ways rather than having a dedicated fund. But I mean, Darren, it's as to whether we explore it, it's obviously for you to consider, but we are certainly supporting tenants with those sorts of issues through those means.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I'm not closed any minds on anything because it's interesting to see it. But Cal, where would the money come from?
Well, I'm not as cited of the detail as you, Dan, but I mean, if we were to look at a one-off allocation today of the kind of figure I suggested, or kind of maybe a bit more or less, I don't know, that's not going to have a massive impact on the reserves of £19.9 million. So a one-off allocation to then be reviewed in a year's time wouldn't, I don't think, be too consequential either way, and could be affordable within the figures that we've got before us.
Scott, you raised your hand.
I'm a bit perplexed. I mean, I know where Cal's coming from, and I think it's coming from the right place, and I get what point he's trying to make is. But I think you've made the point eloquently, Darren. Where is it going to come from? Because we're already talking about a budget deficit of £200,000. Wayne's articulated without the planned maintenance work that would have happened in normal times without COVID is about 1.5. So we're sitting on quite a budget deficit, and you want to chuck an extra £100,000 into that. You know, I think it comes from the right place, but I think in the context of the report and what we've got in front of us, I don't think it's feasible. I think we need to explore, like James has said already, what we're already doing and making sure we're not overlapping. Because if there is a way that you can do something like this, Darren, which would be a nice thing to do, but realistically we have to find the financial acumen to actually be able to do it. You know, and that is the issue that I'm having at the moment when I'm reading the report. And it's quite clear that we have a budget deficit in the HRA as it is. Do we really want to exacerbate that by adding a little bit more to it, when we could actually already be overlapping on the services such as MOP, for example, that already are doing a lot of these things that Cal's asking?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting is that the council, I mean, we as an administration set up a white goods service already. The Moving On project, which runs out of Buckland, provides a white goods service and various other things for homeless people who are moving in. So I think that's one of the things we need to look at. So those white goods services are there. One of the issues, and this is actually going to come back again and again throughout this meeting and elsewhere, is that people are looking for help, often because they're behind with their rent. So we have a series of repayment plans, which frankly I want extended to the private rented sector, to be honest. We have a series of repayment plans which are in place, and that seems to be where a significant amount of the hardship lies. So we're already doing, Cal, many of the things that that you're suggesting, but as James has said, in a slightly different way, rather than having a specific fund there. However, I do think that how we help people who are hard up needs to be looked at, perhaps in a more coherent way, and we will come back to that as we go forwards, because there are other things which are linked to that. And so I would suggest, James, that as part of the plan that is being worked on in terms of getting the debt down, that we look to see whether we can look at the elements that are being done as part of in order to deal with hardship, and see whether they need any refinement at all. Because if we're doing many of the things that happen already, but we know that there may be a problem, then it's a case of, well, do we have to change anything? Or if not, and if we do, what do we do? And if we don't have to change anything, we don't. Scott?
I think it's a really fair point, Darren, you've just made. I think Cal makes some really. I do actually agree where he's coming from. I sort of get the point he's making, but there's no point doubling up, you know, when we don't have to. So it might be a case of, like you say, centralising a service into one place so we can actually have a one-size-fits-all method, or just finding out how we can link these services together a lot better. But I think I'm quite interested to see how this is going to proceed. Actually, if you're going to look down this avenue, and I'd be quite keen to see how it works.
Well, I think the three of us have regular. I mean, people watching don't know, but the three of us have regular briefing meetings to discuss these things anyway. And I really do think how we're going to get the debt down is important. And I think in many cases, we've been able to get the debt down and able to get costs down without making significant cuts, because we've looked at how the service has been delivered and doing it differently, which we find improves the service and cuts the costs, which seems paradise all round. Sorry, James.
No, Darren, I'm just reminded that I believe Mark Sage is bringing forward an update through Cabinet, I believe, that's looking at all of the support in all its range that's on offer to support residents, which will also include tenants and leaseholders. So it may well be that we can use some of that just to look at whether or not there is indeed a gap as described, and then perhaps work towards that once Mark's done that work.
Yeah, no, I think that's very sensible. I mean, like Scott, I sympathise where Cal is coming from. I think that there's a lot of stuff coming down the track, and a lot of what we're doing today is about planning for that stuff coming down the track. But we don't know how good or bad it's going to be because of the virus, because we don't know how long the restrictions are going to last. We don't know what the impact will be. We don't know what the new different will be. But Cal is right to raise the issue, well, how are we going to look after the least of these brothers of mine and sisters of mine? And it's how we do it. But we are doing several of the things that Cal has outlined already. And I'm certainly open-minded as to how we actually take this forward. Maria, it's all been politicians talking, so apologies for that, Maria. What do you think, my love?
I think what Cal has said sounds good, but I think we need to look more in depth, because if we are in deficit, then we've got to think, where could the money come from for this? And like you and James have said, we do have services running that are helping people out, so maybe it needs a bit more joined up thinking. I'm not sure, but the basic idea is good, but it needs to be worked on how it can be done.
No, I'm grateful to that for that view from the Residents Consortium, Maria, and obviously I would want any plans around this to come to the consortium as well, because it's pointless cooking it up in a council when actually we need to find out the real and lived experience of tenants and leaseholders. So Anna, I don't think that's an extra point to be added, but I think that this discussion should be noted in the minutes. That we will pursue how to help social housing tenants who will be whose positions may get worse as a result of the pandemic over the coming months, and bring proposals back to any appropriate forum, including the Residents Consortium. Is that reasonable democratic ease, Anna?
Yes, but it's not an extra recommendation. No. It's just for the minutes.
No. but no, I'm grateful to colleagues for their thoughts on this. Cal, was that it from you?
Yes, thank you.
No, that's all right. Thank you very much for that, Cal. That's very kind. Thank you, Scott, for your questions as well. So it's my turn, really, and I think we've just been touching on some of the issues, which is because since I agreed this budget last year, COVID has turned the world upside down, and it impacts what's before us today. Being told to stay in means less cash in the economy. It means rent arrears go up, increasing the budget gap we have to fill, as Mr. Layton has explained. It also means we cannot increase rents by what we expected, widening that gap further. Scott talked about deficits and budgets earlier on, and I have been clear for really over the past few months with the housing team that we must plan for the new different, and that means having a plan to get the debt down. I'm delighted that they are working on it, and I look forward to seeing more detail in the coming months. Yet, despite this bleak picture, this budget still manages to deliver on what matters to our city. My party believes this city should have more homes people can afford. As James and Wayne has outlined, the efforts to build and buy them mean we have the biggest programme of new council housing in a generation, which, as far as the budget is concerned, also helps bring down the gap. But we also recognise we don't own this planet. It's on loan to us from our children and their children, and that means we must do all we can to cut the harm done to it. And that's why in the budget line you're seeing we are not increasing heating charges, but we are making sure that we've changed the contract that heats many of our council flats so that they can have totally renewable electricity without increasing prices. It is also why I'm delighted to see a dedicated budget line for Lamport Community Garden, a facility closed during the pandemic, a facility that before then had an average of 9.5 visits a day. That's not good enough. And that is why, working with local people and the Charles Dickens ward councillors, I want it to be not just a place where people go to read books, but a base to encourage people across council tenants and leaseholders across our city to grow their own gardens. And the safety of our planet matters, and so too does the safety of our tenants. That's why I'm delighted that this administration has, for the first time, as far as I know, utilised the HRA budget to put more wardens on our estates and in our blocks, offering security to tenants and leaseholders. And because we know how much giving our young something to do helps them avoid a life of crime, I'm also delighted to see a 17% increase in funding for police services and a 14% increase in money for youth clubs in this budget. This budget is tough, as has been outlined, and we must have plans to cut the deficit still further. But I'm delighted that despite all this and despite the nightmare of the last year, we're continuing to deliver on the people's priorities, getting repairs done, providing more homes people can afford, making them as green as we can, keeping our estates and blocks safe. And on that basis, I'm delighted to support and agree the recommendations before us today. So thank you very much, Mr. Layton. You can stay for the rest of the meeting if you choose. You do not have to if you do not want to. But I'm also delighted that Councillor Susie Horton, the Cabinet Member for Children and Families and Education, has arrived. I know Susie's particularly interested in the final item. If we have time, we may or may not hear a few words from her, depending upon how it goes or whether we're still here at 6 o'clock. But I wish to move to the next item on the agenda, which is the Cabbage Field Row housing development. Jo.
Thanks, Darren. So Cabbage Field Row then. I am asking you to note that the Cabbage Field Row development is ready to proceed to an outline planning consent. And also that we are looking at a plan here for somewhere around 150 council housing dwellings. The recommendations are that we ask you to approve housing revenue account capital expenditure of £260,000 to deliver outline planning consent for a development of 150 council housing dwellings on the land known as Cabbage Field Row. And I ask that you note that we will bring you a further report once the outline consent is achieved, with the detail in it, the detail of the consent, as well as the request to request permission for the build and for the future capital spend. The build standard and the makeup of the units will also be included in the future paper, as those haven't yet been decided. So unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to go into details today on what we're planning to do. Cabbagefield Row is a 7.4 hectare piece of land. It sits in the north of the Warren, an area in Havant Borough Council, adjacent to Stroudon Court. Stroudon Court is a large PCC housing area. The site also sits adjacent to the new Portsmouth Reservoir site that's proposed. The Havant Borough Council local plan allocates Cabbagefield Row as a large residential development. The site is currently unmaintained and there's substantial work to do in order to bring the scheme forward, both so that it meets the Havant Borough Council local plan, but also due to the ecology of the site. There's a new scheme also proposed for the Stroudon Court development, which we will be hoping to bring you later in the year. We've worked with our colleagues in Housing Needs Advice and Support, who obviously have a detailed understanding of the housing demand for the site, and the feasibility has been done in line with this. The delivery of the homes would need to meet not only those on the Portsmouth City Council, but also on the Havant Borough Council waiting list, and they would also be able to help as a development of this size by generating movement within the general needs housing stock. We've got a very strong working relationship with Havant Borough Council, and Alison, who's also on the line today, has been meeting with the Havant Borough Council Housing Manager for Development to look at how we can create housing solutions that benefit both Havant Borough Council and Portsmouth residents. We expect a condition of the Planning Permission to be that Havant Borough Council would receive 30% nomination rights for the development. We want to include in the outline planning application the nomination rights and the status of the dwellings as council homes, and it's important for us to get those things established early, and that's why we've taken the decision to come forward now with this decision. As I said previously, the dwelling mix, the rent levels, the build standards, they will all be brought to a future meeting once the design is completed, and we're not at a point in the design stage at the moment to bring that forward to you. I think that's about it. Wayne, did you want to talk about the finance comments?
Sorry. Yeah, so I think what we're saying in the finance comments is we don't have any detail, but we've run an outline financial appraisal based on some assumptions about what it might cost and the likely income. And we feel that there's a good degree of certainty that we will be able to come up with a financially viable scheme, but obviously there's a long way to go before we get there, which is why we're bringing forward a recommendation. We'd like to spend more capital money from the HRA to investigate this further.
Okay, does that end the officer introduction?
Yes, thank you, Darren.
Okay, that's fine. So I'll stick to the plan which I had. Scott.
Thank you, Darren. Let me just go through my notes on this one. Yeah, actually, I mean, I read this report, and usually these reports are quite self-explanatory, but I find this one deliberately vague, and I say that in a sense of, I don't say that with any malice either. I say that in a sense of what I'm reading, and I think Joe's articulated why, because we're not at a design stage yet, and we're going to spend £260,000. And usually we would have a much more complete picture than what we've got, and we don't have that here. So I almost get the feeling that this is being rushed, and I question potentially why that is being rushed. And it does concern me, because especially when we look at the financial aspects of the report, and I'm glad that Wayne has stayed, because he's always very helpful. And I look at the financial aspects, and we're looking again £38 million on the site over a 30-year period. I mean, I equate that to about £253,000 of property, you know, and that's a baseline figure that Wayne has given us. What I would like to know, and I think it should be just interesting so we know how it works as a committee, because Wayne said there is not a real in-depth financial appraisal. How have they came to the figure of 38 million? Because I think that's it's in there. It's in 7.1 of the report, and I think it's something that we need to know, especially now as it's come here. Can you help me?
Shall I answer that? That's correct.
Yes, can I do the first bit and then thank you, Wayne. Sorry, I'll just jump in on the first bit if you don't mind, and then Wayne can jump in on the finance. We're not being deliberately vague. The situation at the moment is vague. We never come forward usually with a request for a planning application. the reason that we're coming forward with a request at this point is because I don't want to move forward in delegated matters. I want to move forward with you understanding that there are a number of questions at play. Will the planning outline allow us to have 100% council homes on the site? Will the planning outline allow us to allocate 70% of the dwellings to Portsmouth and 30% to Havant? Doing a development of this size and the kind of numbers that we're talking about, I want to bring forward a report to you that is much more detailed. And one way to do that without spending a quite extreme amount of money is to take those matters forward to the outline permission stage. You can exclude matters from an outline permission, but what this will do is give us much greater certainty on how we move forward. So I'm not being deliberately vague. What I'm attempting to do is to be deliberately less vague by closing down these matters before I come forward to you in the future. And I don't think that it would stand scrutiny to move forward to a fully worked up design and then have those discussions happen. I think that it's prudent to limit the spend until we have those questions answered, and at that point to come back to you with a much more detailed explanation. And that will then allow you to complete the picture. And I wanted to be fully transparent about that and why I was doing it, which is why I've come forward with this report now. Wayne, over to you. Sorry about that.
Sorry. I've dropped my papers, so all my notes I've made have gone, which is why I'm scrambling.
Are you being deliberately vague, Wayne? Is that some sort of euphemism?
I think actually, to reiterate what Joe said, we're actually being more transparent with this scheme, because what they've done is they've done an outline design, bulking and matting. They've had a firm of quantity surveyors have actually looked over what the potential development would cost on the basis of what we know at the moment, but we need to spend more money in order to be able to work this design up, and because of the scale of it, we need, £260,000 to carry on with that work. And as Joe said, once we've done that piece of work, the more detailed piece of work, and we've got approval to do it, we'll bring another report back or say, this is what a potential development would look like. So apologies, I was being a bit vague, but there is more than just a wet finger in the air.
Okay, don't worry, Wayne. The whole report's quite vague, to be fair. I don't think it's intentional, and I'm grateful that Joe has made a note that it's not intentional. But it is vague. I mean, it's not what we would normally do, which is why it's raised a red flag with myself. I mean, I see these reports quite often, and this is not normal to move it forward in this fashion. I think the officers accept that we would not normally work in this manner, but you've outlined why you're doing it, so I accept that. But that's really all I got, and I'd be just interested to see the financial aspect behind it, Wayne, but I'm pretty sure you can tell me at a later date.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that's fine. Did you have any further questions, Scott?
Not at the moment, Darren.
Okay. Cal?
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. Just firstly, to better understand what the decision is that's before us today, this £260,000, I mean, presumably that £260,000 isn't just to obtain outline planning permission, is it? It's also for the design works. Is that correct?
Yeah.
You've got on mute there.
There's a lot of reports, surveys, design work, etc. required to get you to the point of having outline permission. So this will fund all of that.
Okay. So I guess my interest really and my questions are going to be coming from the angle, what is the brief that is going to be given to the architects that are undertaking the design, who we're effectively commissioning today? And I'm particularly interested in relation to a few specific issues, which I appreciate you may have touched on briefly earlier in terms of saying we don't have that detail before us today. But what I would like to understand is what is the brief on these issues that we will be given to the designers for them then to come back to us with a proposal. And the obvious starting place, I think, in the current context is with regards to green and environmental standards. Now, I'm assuming there's already been some kind of assumptions made about this in order to produce a cost. So the estimated costs that we have in front of us, what green standards has that been based on? Is that just planning compliance, or is that going beyond planning compliancy? And also the kind of second part, which I'm also interested in, is in terms of provision of community facilities. obviously this report speaks to 150 new properties in an area where there are already a number of council properties and some community facilities. But I guess my question is, are we proposing potentially as part of this development to provide new community facilities? And have we done any assessment of what the needs of that community might be, and what their interests are, whether there are opportunities for the provision of new council facilities as part of a new development? I mean, just an example off the top of my head, I know a few years ago there was a campaign being run by some local parents in the area, one in an adventure playground for Lee Park, whether that's something that potentially could be factored into this kind of development. I don't know, but yeah, so I mean, I'm interested in green standards and community facilities, and what brief we're going to be given to the architects on those issues.
So for the outline feasibility stage that we're at the moment, what we've done is we've looked at a mix. You need to be as prudent as is feasibly possible, because you actually at this stage you know that you need a mixed community. You don't know exactly how it needs to be mixed. So we tend to aim on the larger side with the properties in order to make sure that you have a workable feasibility study. As you move through and understand the mix, so the biggest issue with this is, one, will outline permission be given to allow them all to be council housing dwellings? And two, what will the nomination split be? In order to discuss the nomination split, you need to understand what the priorities are for both the Havant Borough Council and the Portsmouth City Council list. It's usually a lot easier because I'm looking at our list and I go and work with my colleagues and I find out what the split is and what the need is, and that's what we develop. So needing to actually enter into this and then make that part of the planning is one of the things that we need to get nailed down really early. Every site has a capacity to be developed. So this site, as I've said, it's in the planning documents for circa 150 units. Obviously, how you then mix that community and work to make it actually work as a mixed community is relevant in terms of who will live there, how they'll live there, what that will look like. And that's one of the pieces that the architects need to do, but they need to do that with the informed knowledge of the Havant and Portsmouth lists. So that's why we need to enter into that detail in a much greater capacity. With regard to the unit cost that's been used by the quantity surveyors, we've used other costs that we've had on recent builds as benchmarks. And that's been done through the team that we're currently developing with our strategic development colleagues. So this is a very outline cost. We're not at a point of saying even what the dwellings are. This is will this be a feasible site? The biggest issue here and the biggest thing that we have looked at the moment is the ecology of the site and what it will actually take to develop this unmaintained space. And that's kind of the biggest cost and the biggest understanding at this point. So we're very far away from understanding exactly what the dwelling mix will be and what the standard of those will be. That's why I was very clear in saying I can't answer those questions yet. I will have that when we come back to look at the overall scheme. The bit that I really need to bring forward is the discussion about nominations and allocations, and then understanding exactly what we're costing and knowing that that's something that's going to be acceptable to our colleagues in Havant for us to bring forward.
Okay. Does that answer your questions, Cal? Did you have any others?
It does, to some extent. I guess the point I would make is that obviously £260,000 isn't an insignificant sum of money, and say we were to proceed today with spending that money with not being able to put any kind of real detail on what the environmental standards may be, it may be that we come back to it further down the line and actually we can't deliver acceptable environmental standards on that site, in which case that £260,000 is kind of gone. So I guess that's the point I make. I appreciate the responses have been given, but I think it's just important that we have some idea in our minds of what is potentially achievable and what is being worked towards in terms of environmental standards, but also in terms of the provision of community facilities and creating that kind of mixed and balanced community that people actually want to live in.
Darren, would you mind if I just said something else?
Yeah, you can say what you like.
Thank you. No piece of land has been devalued by taking it through a planning process to understand what's capable of it. There are too many questions for me to bring forward a proposal to spend £38 million. I am actually safeguarding the asset by taking it through planning and understanding its capacity. So that's the purpose of this. It's to be very transparent. You're absolutely right. £260,000 is not an insignificant sum, and that's why I've bought the paper. But by spending £260,000, you increase the value of an asset by having done the work to find out what can be built on it. Should a response come back that, and I'm not suggesting that it will, but should a response come back saying it isn't suitable for 150 council dwellings, that would be a conversation that we should have here, explaining then the options that you have in front of you. So until I've done this piece of work, we can't have that conversation. But to be clear, I don't think that there is any risk in proposing that £260,000 is spent to bring forward a planning outline for this site, because what it will bring forward is an understanding of what Havant Borough Council consider to be the development envelope for the site and what type of dwellings they think would be suitable to be placed there. I have got an answer for you on community facilities as well, because I wrote it down and I didn't answer you earlier. The community facilities answer is that the local centre is in Stroudon Court, which is directly across the way. And one of the things that we have to bring into consideration is how that local centre is served and helped and supported if you're going to be adding to the size of the community. So that piece of work is currently in detailed design. And so what you will effectively get is the detailed design for the Stroudon Court piece coming through with the Stroudon Court design, and then a follow-up report on the Cabbagefield Row piece, which would see Cabbagefield Row detailed design coming through after it. So you will see a picture developing as I bring these reports before you subsequently.
Anything else, Cal?
No, I think that's covered my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. My turn. I have no questions, just a few comments, if I may. I think the first thing is that I don't believe there is a case of this site not happening, which is where I think the sense of, oh my God, we're spending £260,000 on this and we might not be doing anything. I think the question is what is happening, and it's a bit more complicated because it's Havant, which may have slightly different planning biases towards Portsmouth. It's much easier in Portsmouth, so I don't think it's a case of 260 grand chucked down the drain. I think Joe is right in that this is the sort of thing a developer would do normally just by going to a board of directors. The only difference is that they don't normally do it in public with people watching. And I think in this particular case, the transparency is right to try and do it because it shows that we're interested in this. So I hope that answers Scott's points, particularly with regards to the money side of it. With regards to Cal's points around greenery and community facilities, all I have said to officers about this is that the site should be as green as possible, and there should be some. To answer to Cal, there should be some community facilities in there. There are trade-offs to be had. I know that the Liberal Democrat Green Coalition in York, for instance, which is very, very keen on embarking, I think Britain's biggest passive house building programme, isn't able to do everything because it means that rent levels can't be as low as possible. So they're having to charge higher rents in order to deliver more passive housing. So those trade-offs are available, and those trade-offs may or may not be happening later. But I think the one thing that is happening is something on this site. So I don't think it's a case of £260,000 down the drain. I would suggest, though, Joe, that £260,000 is a ceiling because we have to try and make sure we get the bill down. And Anna, I would be happy to pass this with 2 words added, if this is okay,
yeah.
Anna?
Yeah.
Which is in recommendation 3. It would be to seek approval of a capital spend of at most £260,000. So the 260 is a ceiling.
Right, so at most is the first line of 1.3.
Yes.
After the figure.
Yeah. So to seek approval of a capital spend of at most £260,000 to deliver outline planning consent for a development of circa 150 council housing dwellings on the land known as Cabbage Field Row haven't.
Right, okay, well,
Yeah,
add
so that gives the sense of this is a ceiling, and that will hopefully encourage people to drive the bill down, which I'm sure will happen. With that, I'm happy to proceed. If that is okay. So I want to move to so with that, thank you for that, Joe. Thank you for that, Wayne. Again, if you wish to leave, feel free, but I suspect Wayne's going to be here for the duration. I want to move to item number 5, which is the private rented sector strategy. Patrick, please explain away.
Thank you, Councillor. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll just go over briefly some of the key points from the report. At Cabinet on the 10th of March 2020, officers were approved to conduct a public consultation on the draft PRS strategy for the city, which had been put together and agreed some months previous to that. Unfortunately, that decision was made on the 10th of March, and then almost immediately afterwards we had the impact of the pandemic and lockdown. So the consultation took place much later than planned, but we managed to do that in September, October 2020. We had a response of 458 responses, 31% from landlords, 46% from tenants. I'd like to draw your attention to specifically sections 6.7 and 6.8 of the report, which are some of the initial actions that gained support from the consultation, and also under section 7, beg your pardon, actions that will require further work and may require our officers to come back to members. Officers recommend that the approval is given for the strategy. We're seeking that approval today. And some actions were included in the recommendation, specifically those that received the highest level of support in the consultation. And those, they're captured in two groups, really. The short-term actions that we can press ahead with, and that's to continue our work to proactively deal with unlicensed HMOs in the city, and to ensure that officers dealing with the private sector in the council are trained to a professional standard. And then for the more longer term actions, we have workshops both for landlords and tenants. That received a great deal of support. 76% of respondents said a very high priority. And mediation, and that was to create a mediation service between landlords and tenants, and that received a support percentage of 72%. So I'd like to put that forward for approval, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Patrick. Cal, this time, if you go first, please.
Thank you, Darren and Patrick. Yeah, I'm not sure I've got any questions at this stage. I think we've covered a lot of the detail in the briefing and leads up to this meeting. I do have a few comments in general, though. Obviously, reform of the private rented sector is something that kind of we, as a Labour group and as opposition councillors, feel quite passionately about, and that's why we've been trying to ensure that it gets put on the agenda and kind of remains on the agenda for a period of time, kind of coming up to a couple of years now. And this strategy is one of the things that has come off that campaign in many ways. So it's good to see that progress is being made. I have to say that in terms of the report that's before us and the proposed actions that are being taken, I'm just not convinced that they amount to the kind of meaningful actions necessary to really change things in the private rented sector. And I mean, let's just look at kind of 2.41, where it talks about the recommendations of the actions to be taken forward. So it's that we're going to continue to deal proactively when an unlicensed HMO is reported, and ensure that officers are responsible for regulating the private rented sector are trained to a professional standards. Now, I'd be quite concerned if that stuff wasn't already happening, to be honest. I'm not sure why it requires a strategy and a report in a public meeting to say that we're going to be doing what should be, I would have thought, the basics of the council has responsibility for in terms of regulating the private sector. I think that there are alternatives which would actually make much more of a difference that we have been put on the table before, but seem to have been kicked down the line, and that's landlord licensing. I think that's the single measure that's within the council's powers that's actually going to make the biggest difference, but that people seem very reluctant to pursue. And yeah, to be honest, I'm kind of not convinced by the actions that are being proposed as part of this. I think they're weak and they're stuff that we should already be doing to a large extent. And there are alternatives, significantly landlord licensing, that should be pursued as well as or in their place perhaps.
Thank you for that, Cal. Patrick, in the consultation, how many people said they wanted selective licensing?
So the part of the consultation connected with licensing was about additional licensing, Councillor Sanders, and not selective licensing. There was support for what people were asked to comment on or to provide support for was to look at a further consultation for the potential implementation of an additional licensing scheme for HMOs in the city, and we had a 62% rating of high or very high priority supporting the idea of that consultation.
Okay. Right, thank you for that, Patrick. Scott.
Thank you, Darren. No, I've read the report and the recommendations. It seems there's quite a lot of work has gone into this. So just say thank you to Patrick and his team for the effort they've gone to get this over the line. Because I know this has been going on. I'd probably want to say a good 18 months probably to get to this point. It's been a long period. Just a few bits in the report. I mean, 2.55, we're talking about the pilots to approach the MHCLG to obviously support some of the implementation of the strategy. I'd be interested to see where that goes. So if that could have a report back to councillors, and I think Darren would be interested, and I think Cal would be interested to see what they think about it and what we're doing. I think that's quite an important step. 2.56 talks about additional licensings for HMOs. I know Cal's already touched on it. It does say quite clearly there's a decision is going to be required on the appropriateness of consultation on reintroducing it. So that would be a decision that I suspect will be made by Darren and will probably come to this meeting to discuss that. He's put a window on it to be summer or early autumn, and it's down to you, Councillor Sanders, when you want that to be, but I'm pretty sure that it'll be as soon as you can possibly do so. I'm going to move on to another part of the report. I mean, 6.3 in the report, it says the role of the city councils have to deliver those things is varied but not without limits. So I think it's very good that we recognise that we do have areas where we are limited in what we can do. And you spoke about mediation there earlier, Patrick, and I appreciate that. I think we had a fair number of consultees, but at the same time, we can't make a landlord go to mediation. We can't make the tenant go to mediation. We are a facilitator in this strategy of anything. So I think we have to be quite realistic about what we can and cannot do. So I think, and the report does make quite reference to that, and I think that's quite a sensible way. This seems like it's something that we can move forward with. I mean, there are elements of it that I personally wouldn't do, but that's my my personal and my political persuasion, and I think Councillor Sanders appreciates that. But I think there are elements that he has listened to, myself and Councillor Corkery, and put them in the report as well. So I appreciate the work that's gone into it. So thank you.
Okay.
Not at all. Thank you very much for that, Scott. I just wanted to respond to the points raised before going on to my own thoughts about this. I don't think it's just the Labour group that's recognised the system needs change. I think that's common to all groups. In fact, I think we all actually agree on the diagnosis, which is that there are too many people on our waiting list who are worried about moving into the private rented sector because they're worried it's not secure enough. They're worried that landlords won't fix the boilers. They're worried that they're going to go behind with their rent and they're going to be booted out at a moment's notice. The lack of security is a real issue. And given the complaints that we all get about Portsmouth is full and we shouldn't be building any more homes at all, the private rented sector has to form an important part of the housing mix in the city. We have discussed selective licensing for several hours over the last few years, and it's not because it's not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea. It just doesn't seem to achieve what its proponents want it to achieve. So, for instance, on the license itself does not include improving property conditions. Even when you have reports that back it, it says, well, you've got to change that. And the fact it doesn't give me any confidence that it is a solution to a problem. I understand and respect the Labour Party's approach to all this. I'm delighted to see any other ideas that they've got on the private rented sector. But it is a question that doesn't deliver what it says it should do, and also isn't backed up by the evidence. So again, for the public's views, Scott, Cal and I see figures around HMOs, and we see figures of where the complaints are. And the complaints are with areas with high concentrations of HMOs in what is known as the East St Thomas area, or as many of us know it, called the Ladder of Roads, in what I call East Somerstown, in Councillor Horton, Councillor Pitt and Councillor Fielding's ward in Central Southsea, and in Councillor Heaney, Councillor Smythe and Councillor Hugh Mason's ward in St Jude. And that's why I think it's important that we at least look at, and ideally bring back, if the evidence is there, additional licensing so that we can deal with those smaller HMOs. I thought it was a shame I didn't inherit the evidence in 2018 to keep it going, frankly, but it wasn't there. So that's why I think it's important that we do that, because that's where the evidence is lying, and it's absolutely important that we're driven by the evidence. So with those caveats and discussions, I'm delighted to approve this strategy. I think the most interesting thing in it is how little has changed between the first and the second consultation. The first was done before the pandemic, the second during the pandemic. The main issues: tenants who feel trapped and worried, landlords who too often fall into the sector, and frankly, both groups needing support and help are the same despite the pandemic. And indeed, doing it this way, holistically and based on evidence, not dogma, seems to be borne out by the very pandemic that we're talking about. And the approach in this report, delivering quick wins and offering realistic timeframes, is sensible given how much we do not know. I said a long while ago that approach would have carrots and sticks, and the evidence bears that out. It is clear that landlords and tenants want the council to do what it does now more and better. And I understand Cal's point around, well, we should be doing this already, but there are many councils in the country who are in the same boat. It's clear from the research in Greater Manchester, which is featured in the report, funded by the Nationwide Foundation, encouraged by Shelter, that many councils need to improve what they do now, make it more integrated, make it better, make it bigger. And that means in this case, tackling poor HMOs, including licensing those ones the evidence tells us posing problems, helping landlords and tenants become better, reconciling their differences, and in line with what we were talking about earlier, offering financial support to help those who fall into rent arrears or cannot afford a deposit or cannot enter the market. It's also timely because of what we know may be coming. The likely increases in unemployment and evictions after COVID restrictions are lifted are something troubling all councils regardless of who runs them. I want this one to put in place plans to deal with it now, not wait for later. And so Scott's point around the discussion around what we do with the government, for instance, is particularly true of the mediation plans. Since the report was published, it's been brought to light the government wants to run a pilot mediation service through the courts. I have asked officers in their meetings with MHCLG to find out exactly what that means, and also whether they could actually help us put together something that can assist that. I'm very keen that government helps us. I'm happy to talk to anyone about doing that, and I understand officers will be raising that at their next meeting with MHCLG. And yes, I would quite like that to come back here. But it's because we are wanting to do these things holistically, not just with random ideas that look great on a leaflet but may not work out in practice, that we're producing a sort of holistic approach that is seen only, frankly, in Greater Manchester. And I'm delighted that Andy Burnham and his team are able to do that, and I'm delighted in our small way we can do that here. There is a long way to go. There's a lot of barriers to overcome. There's a lot of mistrust to overcome as well. But I think if we don't do it this way, then we're just going to have a sticking plaster that, as I said, looks great on a leaflet and frankly looks lousy when it comes to actually putting together decent policies. So on that basis, I'm happy to approve this strategy as it goes forwards. So Patrick, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for your comments, Cal and Scott. They're very welcome. I'm sure this will not be the last time we will talk about this. I have a feeling we won't. So moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is the next phase of the approach to improving the lives of rough sleepers, which is the pathway for rough sleepers and purchase of associated properties. I don't know who's doing this, so offers please. Mr. Fielding.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll introduce the report, but we've got Sharon George, who's been overseeing our rough sleeping work, and Joe Bennett, who has been involved in looking at the obtaining of properties. But I'll start with the introduction. And the purpose of the report is we want to bring you the pathway model as outlined, seek approval on how we want to spend the government grants which have been obtained, and seek approval particularly with regarding the acquisition of portfolio of accommodation. As is outlined in section 3 of the report, in recent years under various administrations, the Council have looked for innovative ways of helping those who are street homeless or sleeping rough. And the history of that was brought back to Cabinet back in July of last year. And the decisions from the report taken to Cabinet were wide and far-reaching, and instructed officers to develop interim and long-term pathway model and to talk to our colleagues at the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government to find suitable funding. And we did that work through autumn of last year, submitting bids, and we had that information come back to us, and the in-principle outcome of that was presented in a report to Cabinet back in December. The funding obtained for the long-term pathway, as outlined in 3.6 of the report, is we've got an indicative £2.1 million of capital funding and revenue funding to support that capital for 3 years from 2021 to 2024 of 2.4 million. And the report outlines how we intend to use that funding. Section 4 of the report outlines the pathway for rough sleepers, and it focuses on the continuation of the Council's accommodation first, not accommodation only model, which is the foundation of both our homelessness and our rough sleeping strategies. And the plan is to offer all rough sleepers the opportunity to engage with housing needs advice and support, make a homeless application, and then go on to have a personalised housing plan which will encompass the needs of the individual. And following that assessment, the most appropriate accommodation and support would be used to support that individual through. 4.8 of the report goes into the detail of to operate that pathway effectively, we will need support services to work in our properties, as well as being outreach, and it is proposed that the funding that we receive from the Next Steps accommodation programme is used to procure that support services, and we're proposing that procurement will take place over the next 6 to 9 months with a plan of having new contracts in place from 2021 to run through to the end of the funding period in March 2024. And as outlined in 4.8 of the report, the important role for the Portsmouth City Rough Sleeping Partnership Group, who will support in identifying those services and how they can be funded beyond that point, but also be involved in the overseeing that we get the right services in place. And we want the procurement of those services to be as flexible as possible, and funding to be used in its most effective way. In addition, and it touches on the previous report, there are lots of other things that we're doing, and just to touch on one of them in 4.12 of the report, it talks about the work that we're doing with landlords in the private rented sector to help move people through the pathway and help rough sleepers find somewhere that they can stay within the private rented sector. Section 5 of the report goes into our property acquisition, and as part of the interim plan, as you'll know, we have obtained properties which we're currently using on Elm Grove and St Michael's Road, and as part of the lease discussions with those owners, confidential discussions were had about potential to purchase those properties, as well as a third property on Elm Grove. And we were in a non-disclosure agreement with them until November, but we can now outline that where those 3 properties are. And the rest of section 5 of the report outlines how we plan to acquire those properties subject to planning permission being obtained, and planning applications have been submitted for the permanent change, and we hope that they go to planning committee in late February or early March of this year. So that is the overview of the reports. The recommendations, as stated, are that we'd like you to approve the model, to approve how we can use the funding to procure the support services, as well as the capital. And section 2.4 asks for delegation authority for Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services in consultation with 151 officer to negotiate acquisition of the portfolio of accommodation, and that we would use this for rough sleepers. Thank you. Happy to take questions.
Thank you for that, Paul. Cal.
Thank you, Darren. Yeah, thanks for the report, Paul and Sharon and everyone else who's been involved in putting it forwards. I think it's clearly a very welcome addition to the array of temporary accommodation that's available in Portsmouth. It represents a kind of significant increase in the availability of that type of accommodation for rough sleepers, and that's clearly a very welcome and positive thing. So I'm kind of fully in support of the work that's gone in to make that happen, and the report before us today. I'm proud to have one of those sites actually in Charles Dickens Ward, and I kind of welcome everyone that'll be staying there to the ward, and I won't be taking the lead of the Tories up in Drayton and Farlington who kind of stirred up in the local community and then opposed the planning application for temporary accommodation up there, but maybe we'll leave that one there. I think in general, moving forward in terms of the council's homelessness strategy, clearly this plays a very important role in offering rough sleepers a way in off the street. But and I know people are kind of well aware of this, and it's surely at the top of everyone's minds, but I think it's worth saying is that this type of accommodation doesn't meet everybody's needs, and in fact it's often the people with the highest needs, the most complex needs, that won't feel able, for various reasons, often very valid and good, won't feel able to go into this type of accommodation. So I think it's just important that we kind of bear that in mind going forward. And although significant progress has been made, and this is clearly a very positive development and report that's before us, there's always, well, hopefully not always, but for the foreseeable future, there's going to be more work to be done until we've got a range of services and accommodation that meets everybody's needs and allows everybody to get in off the street. Thank you.
You're on mute, Councillor Sanders.
Thank you for that. Sharon, did you want to come back on the point that Cal was talking about, which was actually around the higher end needs with regards to what we might be doing?
I think thank you, Councillor Corkery and Councillor Sanders. I think you know, we've always wanted to take an individual approach to everybody's circumstances. And I think, you know, we can't meet everybody's needs in what we're proposing. So we are continuing to work with individuals around access to other properties and to how we can assist them using a flexible approach to that. I think the key really is the work that we do on the streets with our commissioned outreach services, including our community wardens, in understanding what it is that's the best thing to meet individual need. So I think that's something we're very aware of, but thank you for your comments.
Thank you for that, Sharon. Scott.
Thank you. Thank you to Councillor Sanders. I think this report, for me, I mean, we've had some very important reports on the table today, but for me, this was the most important report that we're going to take in the meeting for what it can deliver and for what changes it can make to people's lives. And I'd like to just firstly say thank you to the officers who I know have been working extremely hard since March, dealing with homelessness and rough sleeping, and to get to this point is an achievement for everyone. So I think you should all take a pat on the back and have a well-deserved rest when you can, because you've put a lot of effort and a lot of hard work into this, and it's very important for the council moving forward. I think it's very encouraging. I think as well it's nice to see that we're actually putting our money where our mouth is. I know that Councillor Corkery made reference earlier to the Conservatives in Drayton and Farlington, when actually it's the Conservative government that are putting their money where their mouth is to ensure that we can buy these properties and begin to try and eradicate rough sleeping and homelessness. It's not a Labour government. Funnily enough, they didn't actually do anything. They talk about it, but don't deliver. Us Conservatives do. So on that point, I think if you go into the report I'm going to go into now, I think Paul brought up 4.12 earlier. I think it's very encouraging that the council is going to work with the private rented sector and work with landlords to actually house them. I think it's very important, and I'd be interested to see, Paul, the long-term effects of that and how that relationship moves forward. I think that's something that potentially we could bring back to this meeting at a later date as an update. I think it's important, and it's good to know that those links are forming now, because I think they're going to be very, very important in the future. It's a very good report. I have no real issues with it. I mean, if I was on the planning committee, I now wouldn't be able to vote for it because I think it's so good. So yeah, I'm happy with this, Darren. I think it's a really, really good way to move forward.
Scott, thank you very much for that, and thank you again for the kind comments that have been put forward. I would say I'm delighted that the government has invested a considerable amount of money, a disproportionate amount of money, into the plan that has been overseen by the Liberal Democrat administration, implemented by the officers and supported broadly by all political parties. We've had our arguments along the way. We will have our disagreements along the way. I know that our Labour colleagues recently said that not enough was being done, and I understand that, and that's fine. But I'm delighted to see that when it was explained to everybody in the homeless working group that in fact the work that was being done, some Labour councillors whose judgments I respect started clapping, which was a huge bonus, because we have been working together, and I want to put on record my thanks to both Scott and Cal for their broad support in what we're trying to achieve, because this is frankly the next step on delivering a simple promise to those sleeping rough in our city, which is that there is hope, not just of a place to stay, but of a life to lead. And the work this city has done on that simple goal is, I'm very grateful to the political support, because it's right. Giving people the chance for a better life should not be a political issue. And I know that what unites us is greater than what divides us on all this. But a hallmark of the plan that we're driving is that we're not just planning for what's in front of us. If we've learned anything from this pandemic, it means we must think ahead or else we fall behind. And that's why it's important that there is a third building in this package, that we're buying a third building, because it means we can help those likely to suffer as the country gets back to normal. We're all scared that the increase in unemployment and the increase in evictions will mean more people on the streets. And if we don't plan for that now, we will fail those people later. And that will go against everything we're trying to do. I've said before, and I'll say again, This pandemic has given us a once-in-a-lifetime chance to tackle rough sleeping, and the work this council has done, supported by all political groups, has changed lives already. And this viable, deliverable plan will allow us to carry on taking that chance and change many, many more lives. I hope now that we can get the permissions that we need from the Planning Committee between now and the 31st of March to make sure that happens. But in the meantime, I'm delighted to approve this approach. Sharon, Paul, thank you very much. For that, you can stay if you wish, or you can make your tea, as it's now 7 minutes past 5. And so we move to the final item on the agenda, which is something I've asked for, which is around full fibre to home and city fibre. But I haven't actually asked for it because it came as a result of a conversation or some comments which I picked up from Councillor Horton, who is still here, around the digital divide in the city, which I don't think enough people know about. Susie, do you have a few comments at all?
Thank you, Councillor Sanders, for letting me just come along to this. I haven't got a lot to say really, but when I heard about the report being written, I just wanted to pop along and just say that I welcome it completely. On the one level, I probably have more casework from people complaining about City Fibre, and I've got a better relationship with City Fibre now, I think, on a PR level. But actually, that's not the bit that I want to talk about. I want to talk about the significance of it at the moment. And I think it was 2019, I think, I sat in a room with, forgive me, Scott, I can't remember, it was some Tory MP called Matt somebody from the Digital Culture, Media and Sport, and we came to kind of do the deal on the contract that we had in Portsmouth and welcome all this investment through City Fibre into the city. And I think at the time, which was just over a year ago, I said something along the lines of it will be really good for Portsmouth schools, because at that time we were having some, let's say, erratic kind of confidence in some of the internet provision within schools, and we were looking towards increasing a more digital kind of engagement when it came to learning. So who would have thought just over a year later we'd actually be trying to keep children out of school in their homes and doing 100% of their learning, or almost 100% of their learning, through digital means. So I don't really need to say how important it's become to for us to realise the good connectivity and access to digital learning is now. To the point where we're actually issuing dongles to go home to help children engage with their lessons and to minimise the disparity in opportunities for learning that we're seeing through this digital divide. So I really wanted to just say that I really welcome it. At the time this project started, it was a completely different landscape. When it came to access to the internet, we knew that it would be important to the future. I'm hoping by the time that this is finished in 2024, I think is the aim to finish it, that we'll be way beyond a pandemic. But I think what's really becoming apparent now is that education and opportunities that digital engagement bring are not going to be, they're not going to be a thing of the past. They're not going to go with the pandemic, and that we will remain with a kind of different way of engaging. And actually the inequalities of the pandemic are very well versed, but on a digital level it is profoundly important that we make sure that we use digital engagement and all this progress to minimise that divide for the most vulnerable families in our city. So on a general level, brilliant, but specifically I wanted to talk about education. And with regard to this particular cabinet meeting, I don't need to tell you guys where the benefits will be for the HRA housing and the access for those families in there. So thank you very much, Councillor Sanders, for allowing me to come in and say those few words.
Not at all, Susie. Thank you very much. That cuts 5 minutes of what I was going to say at the end, which is, I'm sure, a pleasure for everyone. Maria, I'm huge. Oh, sorry, officer presentation. I apologise. I was far too keen to hear from Maria. So who from the officers wishes to talk about this?
It's me, Darren. Thank you.
Maria, thank you very much.
It's not often that I have an item introduced by another councillor. So thank you, Councillor Horton. Thank you for that.
You can do it again if you want. Don't worry.
Yeah. So Councillor Sanders, this is a information only report, and its purpose is to update your good self in terms of the background to the citywide fibre installation, outline the benefits of which Councillor Horton's already done for me in terms of full fibre to the HRA properties, and then also outline the next steps. As Councillor Horton said in the introduction, Portsmouth were successful in bidding for and gaining nearly £4 million a couple of years back to introduce full fibre to our operational buildings within Portsmouth, and that included schools properties, community centres, sports centres, HRA operational buildings, as well as some CCTV locations, and also some children's homes, and that work is well advanced, and despite the pandemic, it's on target to be completed and operational by the tail end of this year, which is really good. And I know that Alison Jeffrey is heavily involved in ensuring that the schools are well represented and made sure that schools are plugging into the full fibre that's available to them. As part of the works within Portsmouth, City Fibre have decided to invest £32 million of their own money in improving the fibre infrastructure for the general populace of Portsmouth, as well as those operational buildings. So they've got a scheme which started on site about the week before the pandemic started in March, and that was to roll out full fibre to the 90,000 dwellings across Portsea Island and within the Portsmouth City Council boundary. So we go as far as QA Hospital in the north, we go west to Porchester, and then east then to into Farlington. We don't actually spread into Lee Park, Waterlooville, Cowplain, etc. at the moment, but it's purely within the PCC boundary. The decision was made and started last year. City Fibre presented to councillors last summer in terms of the benefits for residents, how the work would be incorporated, and also information around communication, media updates, but also in terms of perhaps how any queries about the work could be fed back then into City Fibre, because obviously if they're digging up roadways and pathways and connected into ductways, there will be upheaval for residents and users of the roads and pavements within Portsmouth. And I think it'd be safe to say that there were a number of teething problems with the project in the early days, but I think that's been resolved as we move forward. As part of the investiture or investment of money within the domestic properties of Portsmouth, City Fibre are very keen then to engage with PCC about ensuring that there's full fibre infrastructure rolled out to all of Portsmouth City Council's residents as well. So Councillor Horton spoke about the digital divide, and I think it's very important for us as the HRA to ensure that our residents have access to digital infrastructure, so internet service providers can tap into the the speeds and the capabilities that the systems can offer. And as such, I'm in the final throes of negotiation around setting up a way leave with City Fibre, so that they have overall permission to carry their infrastructure, digital and fibre infrastructure, across our properties. And as part of that work, then we will agree then the way leave, and then we'll agree individual building route packs with City Fibre to ensure that the fibre, the route of the fibre within our communal areas of properties then are in the appropriate and correct placing. We've invested a lot of money in our blocks over the 25 years that I've been working for Portsmouth City Council, and we want to make sure that any fibre cables or ducts or conduits are installed correctly within those buildings. I will have a dedicated resource within my surveyors team who will be the point of contact for City Fibre, and that's to agree the individual route packs with City Fibre, but also to make sure that we've got full liaison with residents with any queries they might have, to make sure that we don't inconvenience residents as well in terms of the work that's going to take place. As part of the agreement of the Wayleaf, I'm working with City Fibre closely to understand what their programme of works are going to be and which blocks are going to be done when and how. Councillor Horton mentioned that the works across the city should be completed by the tail end of 2024, and once the Wayleaf is agreed with the high level Wayleaf is agreed with City Fibre, and we start then to look at the various route packs and the blocks that they're going to be installing the fibre to, we'll then agree programmes, and we can communicate that with residents to make sure that there's a full communication package and roll out to residents to know when it's happening and what it means for them. I don't think I need to go into the advantages of what City Fibre can mean. You know, the increased internet speeds, which makes all aspects of using the internet a lot quicker. And I think the key thing that I'm pleased about is that rolling out full fibre to our residents will also complement then the full fibre that the City Council is also rolling out then in terms of our operational buildings. So we're making sure that we've got good connectivity to our operational buildings. We can manage them remotely, things like building management systems, etc., and making sure that our staff working in blocks have got the fastest speeds going, but also our residents then can benefit from those exceptional speeds that fibre can offer as well. I've got nothing more to add, Councillor Sanders, than that, rather to say that what I will do is perhaps I'll flag within the diary perhaps future updates for you in terms of how we've been going and the percentage of blocks that we've installed to, and perhaps even feedback from residents, how they're finding the works, but also whether they're signing up for the the full fibre as well. The intention is to agree a communication and media plan, and that we'll be using platforms such as House Talk and also Facebook, and also our other Instagram pages, etc., to make sure that we can really promote this work across a variety of platforms to make sure that we engage with as many of our residents as we can. Thank you.
Okay, Meredith, thank you very much indeed. I'm delighted if City Fibre has learnt from the displeasure that Councillor Lindstag and I gave them after the Milton Road fiasco. Then I think that would be a suitable piece of learning, because it can't get any worse than that, I tell you. Scott first this time. I'm now back to my plan. This is good. Scott.
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. Just a quick one, Susie. I think it was Matt Warman would have been the MP that would come down from the digital. I think he does. I think he looks after digital and broadband. I think is his actual his area of expertise. No, I mean this is a really good report. I mean this was originally in the Chancellor Spring Statement in 2018 actually. Then obviously it got signed off in 2019. So obviously I know a bit about this from when obviously we were previously the administration when it was coming forward, and obviously it's been signed off by you guys. So I'm very happy to see it go forward. I'm glad that you mentioned Milton Road, Darren, because it was quite shocking. What happened down there?
It really was not that good.
It was not.
It was not good.
That's my only real gripe with it, is if they've learned from their mistakes of previous issues that they've had. But I mean, Susie touched on the most important thing actually earlier with the pandemic and children learning and ensuring they've got access to material. I mean, I spoke to Councillor Norton last week, who's teaching a class online, but then also has got 7 children in the room at the same time, and he's making sure that all these kids are being access to learning. And that, he said sometimes kids drop out. He said because the connection's not so good. He said then and stuff like that. It's quite interesting to have those conversations and see where there is actually a digital divide. So if we can help our our most vulnerable and our children to actually access the material, I think it's only going to be a good thing for the city. And I think the pandemic's taught us anything, that we can actually do things remotely. So the better the connection, the better connectivity, the better for everyone. So it's a really it's a really good report, and I'm really grateful that obviously this has come here, and I'm grateful for Councillor Horton's attendance, because I think she's articulated why this needs to be done, better than anyone. And I think it's really important. So yeah, great report. Happy with it.
Thank you for that, Scott. Cal.
Thank you, Darren. Yeah, kind of similarly supportive of the report. Just a couple of questions I've got. When we talk about a digital divide, clearly part of that is about access to current good speeds, but kind of another part of it, and probably a more significant part, is the kind of financial barriers. So I'm just curious about whether there's anything that we can do as a local authority to support people with access to broadband on a kind of financial side of things, and kind of bringing their bills down. I was speaking to a resident recently, and he asked me a question I didn't know the answer to. So while we've got Meredith here, I'll put it to him, because I thought it was quite an interesting point. And he said, kind of, say there's 20 of us living in this council block, we all pay between £20 and £40 a month for broadband. Isn't there some way it could be provided communally, and then we pay a cheaper rate kind of through our service charge? Now, presumably there is some kind of technical or legal reason why we couldn't do that, but I just don't know the answer. So I thought I'd put the question to you out of interest.
I think one broadband provider for the whole UK. I think that might have been an election a few months ago. I may have been wrong on that, but
well, everyone seems to be a broadband communist these days. So
I knew I'd get the C word out of you eventually in this meeting, Cal. I knew. Right, Meredith, thank you. That's a reasonable point from Cal.
Yeah, I apologise in advance, Councillor Corkery, because the extent of my knowledge of full fibre is presented in the report in front of you. However, the City Fibre the City Fibre scheme is to install the infrastructure, for want of a better word, and then internet service providers then can tap in to that provision. Unlike other local authorities and cities where City Fibre work, they've got almost the equivalent of an open protocol system, so they're not tied in with a particular internet service provider. Anybody can use their infrastructure. So from my point of view, that will ensure that we will get and ensures competition in the marketplace, and that residents can get a better deal. I have actually got a meeting with City Fibre, I think in about 10 days' time, and one of the queries I will ask is if there is there a possibility that that we could have almost like communal, for want of a better word, broadband, in a similar way that we offer residents the communal integrated television reception aerials in blocks of flats, and the radios as well. So it's something that I'm not aware of at the moment, but I will endeavour to find out and feed back to you as part of our regular meetings.
Okay,
I think that answers your question. Even I know. I think that answers your question. Is that all right? Yeah. I think the desire to have broadband as cheap as possible, which I think is where Cal is coming from, is absolutely important. And if we can do that, great. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I mean, competition does work, and you've seen very cheap prices in the broadband market in the UK because of the nature of competition. But if we can use the power of what we have to try and drive it down, which I think is Cal's point, that's a very, very good one. And I'm delighted it was on your radar already. I'm delighted there's no rehearsals between you and Cal in these meetings. This is excellent. This is good. This is good. So I suppose it's my turn. And Susie has articulated this a bit better than I can, which, as I said, means you've got 5 minutes less of me, which is probably a good thing. I think. Thank you, Susie, for that. That's excellent. Thank you. I mean, the digital divide is surreal, and in this city, it's not purely between poor and rich. I mean, half of South has been on dial-up for years, which is shocking, frankly. But particularly now, particularly homeschooling, particular figures that Susie gave to me with regards to the gap and the numbers of poor kids who are in poor homes, particularly in our council homes, who are not getting full fibre broadband. is shocking. And that's why I think we do need to accelerate that. And that's why I wanted this report here, to give an idea of we actually are endeavouring to do something about it. Because it does matter, and it is as important now as heating, particularly now we're all working, or most of us are working remotely, and it's trying to give particularly kids the best chance in life. I think Meredith's point about feedback is absolutely essential, and I hope Cal and Scott, please pass back to your party colleagues if you get any feedback, and then feed it into the team, please, and also pass that on to Claire as well, please, Cal. A lot of it's going to be in your ward, frankly, so therefore it will be useful to get some positive and negative feedback about what goes on. But we've got to do this, because if we don't, then the one part of the gap between rich and poor will continue, and that's not something I think any of us want in this city. So Meredith, thank you very much indeed for all that. On that basis, I'm happy to agree I'm happy to note what is in the report and take that forwards. And so, Anna, that means we've come to the end of our meeting.
Right.
And that means, sorry?
Should I turn the live stream off?
You can, after I say that I formally close the meeting at 28 minutes past 5.
Right, I'll go and do it now. It'll take a couple of, you'll still be audible for a couple of minutes.
That should not be a problem for a bunch of politicians. Maria, thank you for putting up with us for 2 hours.
That's all right. Look forward to the next meeting.